Nature has kept these corpses as frightening versions of who they once were. Here are 7 of the most well-preserved bodies ever found. Number 7. Lindow Man. Also known as Lindow II, the Lindow Man was discovered by commercial peat cutters on the 1st of August 1984. The find was considered to be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 1980s, and it rekindled the interest for British bog bodies among researchers. Bog bodies are human cadavers naturally mummified in peat bogs that may, in certain cases, be preserved in almost perfect condition. Bogs are wetlands that accumulate in peats, which are deposits of dead plant material, mostly consisting of various types of mosses. Other human body parts had been previously discovered in the Lindow Moss area in Cheshire, northwest England. A year prior to the discovery of Lindow Man, the Lindow woman had been found, consisting of a skull fragment with hair and soft tissue attached to it. Lindow Man, however, remains the most extensive bog body yet discovered in England. The research revealed that at the time of his death, sometime between the year 2 BC and 119 AD, he was a healthy male in his mid-20s. The body showed little evidence of rough work, which led researchers to conclude that he might have been someone of higher status. Lindow Man's death was a violent one. He was strangled and hit on the head, possibly with a small axe, before having his throat cut. The V-shaped cut atop his skull suggests the use of a blunt object, and it is believed that the impact sent skull fragments into his brain. There is still debate in the archaeological community as to whether his death was plain murder or part of an Iron Age or Romano-British period religious ritual. It has been theorized that the triple death he had suffered, consisting of strangulation, having his throat slit, and the infliction of a head wound, was in fact an offering to several gods. After his death, he was left face down in the Lindow Moss. The body was freeze-dried and placed on the display in the British Museum in a specially constructed case. Number 6. Window I. Window I was a bog body discovered by commercial peat cutters in northern Germany near Windaby in 1952. According to DNA testing performed by Canadian pathologist and anthropologist Professor Heather Gill Robinson, the remains belonged to the body of a 16-year-old boy. Radiocarbon dating placed the time of death somewhere between 41 BC and 118 AD. Unfortunately, the peat cutting machinery had already severed a foot, a leg, and a hand from the body by the time the peat cutters noticed it. The peat had preserved the body well, and it was still an important archaeological find despite the damage. At the time of his discovery, the boy had a woolen blindfold over his eyes, and his head was half shaven. Scientists have theorized that the reason why half of his skull did not have hair on it was the fact that it had been exposed to oxygen longer than the rest of the body, which contributed to the decomposition. The blindfold was later determined to have actually been a woolen band, possibly used to tie back his shoulder-length hair that had slipped on his face after he died. The boy's death is believed to have come in the form of punishment or sacrifice, a theory supported by the rocks and branches that the body was found under, which could have been used to hold his body down. Number 5. The Bogston Man. The Bogston Man was discovered on the 22nd of June 1936 in Sweden's Varbir municipality. In the 1880s, the Bogston farm was established next to a bog. During that period, the bog was routinely drained so that afterwards a harrow could be used to gather the peat. Albert Johansson reportedly discovered the skeleton after his harrow caught on sackcloth. Johansson and his father called a doctor and the police the following day. It was determined that the body was far too old to be part of any police investigations that were ongoing at the time. A curator from the local museum was contacted. He invited a group of other specialists to the site, and the Swedish Museum of National Antiquities, where the Bogston Man currently lies, was also consulted. The body was dated back to the 14th century. and it was of a man between 25 and 35 years old, based on forensic analysis of his teeth. He had been impaled with 2 poles to the lake bed, one that went through his back and another that hit his heart. The Bogston man's head featured a 3 by 2 inch wound on the right side of the cranium. This has led to the hypothesis that the Bogston man had been murdered. In 2006, a computed tomography of the body suggested that he was first hit in the lower jaw, then the right ear, before the lethal blow to the back of his head. His woolen tunic was among the best preserved medieval tunics ever found in Europe. The man also wore a hood on his head, and on his upper body, he had a shirt and a cloak. Other items found on the body include a leather sheath, 2 knives, a belt, leather shoes, foot coverings, and a fabric bag. According to a local legend, the body belonged to a man who, at one point, was recruiting soldiers in the area. The peasants had murdered him and buried his body in the bog. As the legend goes on, his ghost began haunting the area, and thus poles were plunged through his body, after which the haunting allegedly ceased. Number 4. The Heraldsker Woman. Discovered by workers while they were excavating peat on the Heraldsker estate in Denmark's Jutland Peninsula, the Heraldsker woman was found in excellent preservation conditions. The body was found in 1835, with the skeleton and even the skin and internal organs intact. In 1977, radiocarbon dating of the body determined that the woman had died at some point in the 5th century BC. The fact that the body had been placed in a bog instead of being buried in dry earth had led scientists to determine that she had been a victim of ritual sacrifice. The woman's neck also presented a faint groove, as if someone had applied a rope for strangulation or torture. The body was naked, and her clothes, consisting of 3 woolen garments and a leather cape, had been placed atop her body. A CT scan that was performed on her cranium indicated that she was around 40 years old when she died. After the body was discovered, initial theories regarding her identity were focused on Queen Gunhild of Norway, who lived around the year 1000 AD. According to an anonymous medieval Icelandic saga, Gunhild had been buried in a bog under orders from Harald Bluetooth of Denmark. However, in 1842, J.J.A. Worsay, a young Danish archaeologist, presented evidence suggesting that the body was actually much older, dating from the Iron Age. Number 3. The Toland Man. While they were cutting peat in the small village of Toland on the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark, brothers Emil and Viggo discovered the body of a man buried 6.6 feet deep in a peat bog. The find took place on the 6th of May, 1950. One of their wives had noticed the corpse while loading the peat onto a carriage. The body's physical features were so well preserved that at first, the workers believed that he had been the victim of a recent murder. 2 days later, they reported the discovery to the police. An archaeology professor was brought in to help identify the body, and an initial analysis concluded that the remains were more than 2,000 years old. The Toland man wore a pointed skin cap made of wool, fastened under his chin by hide thong. Around his waist, he had a smooth hide belt. There was also a hide noose wrapped tightly around his neck, which trailed down his back. The body was found in the fetal position, and the man's eyes and mouth were closed. It was concluded that he had been a human sacrifice, part of a religious ritual that had taken place somewhere between the years 375 and 210 BC. The lack of oxygen underneath the peat's surface, along with the acid in the peat and the cold Nordic climate, are believed to have contributed to the preservation of the soft, tender tissues of the body. There are still debates as to whether he had died due to the hanging or another form of suffocation. The original head is still preserved at the Silkeborg Museum in Denmark, attached to a replica body reconstructed based on the original skeletal patterns. Number 2. Ötzi. Ötzi, also known as the Iceman, is currently Europe's oldest known natural mummy. He was discovered by 2 German tourists, Erika and Helmut Simon, on the 19th of September 1991 in the Ötztal Alps, hence the name Ötzi. The body was found frozen in ice below the torso, and ice axes and pneumatic drills had to be used in the extraction. The remains have been extensively measured, dated, examined, and x-rayed. Ötzi was only partially deteriorated because because ice had covered his body shortly after his death, which aided in the preservation. It has been determined that the man had died around the age of 45 at some point between 3239 and 3105 BC during a historical period known as the Chalcolithic or Copper Age. Hypothermia due to very low temperatures has been cited as the initial cause of death. However, the discovery of an arrowhead lodged in his shoulder, the presence of cuts and bruises on his hands, chest, and wrists, as well as signs of cerebral trauma from a blow to the head, led many to believe that he was killed, perhaps as part of a ritual sacrifice. Scientists have theorized that during his life, Ötzi might have been involved in copper smelting, as the blade of the axe found with him was 99.7% pure copper. The axe was particularly well crafted and is believed to have served as both a tool and symbol of status for the bearer. Other items found with the body included a quiver of 14 arrows, a flint-bladed knife with an ash handle, and an unfinished yew longbow that was 72 inches long. The man had a total of 61 soot tattoos, which consisted of 19 groups of black lines that ranged from 1 to 3 millimeters in thickness and 7 to 40 millimeters in length. This was determined by a radiological examination of his bones. His clothes and shoes were sophisticated and had been made from the leather of different animal skins. Analysis of the body revealed that at the time of his death, Ötzi was suffering from several health problems. He had an intestinal parasite and his teeth were severely deteriorated. A DNA analysis indicated that he was lactose intolerant, proving that the condition was present even in the Copper Age. In May 2012, it was announced that Ötzi still had intact blood cells, the oldest complete human blood cells ever found. Amazingly, his living red blood cells looked like a modern-day sample. A study from October 2013 showed that 19 modern-day Tyrolean men shared a certain genetic mutation with the 5,300-year-old Iceman. There were rumors of a possible Ötzi curse, as 7 people, including the man who first examined him and Helmut Simon, his co-discoverer, had reportedly died in mysterious circumstances. Number 1. The Children of Yuyayalco. The Children of Yuyayalco are 3 Inca mummies discovered by an archaeological team led by Dr. Johann Reinhardt at Mount Yuyayalco on the Chilean-Argentinian border. They were considered to be among the best preserved mummies ever discovered. The burial is believed to have occurred 500 years prior to the discovery. While the team was searching for the Inca sacrifice rites, they discovered the gravesite containing 3 Inca children, 2 girls and 1 boy, along with textiles and statues made from precious materials. The oldest mummy was a girl, believed to have been around 15 at the time of death. She was named La Doncella, translated as the Maiden. It has been theorized that she was a sun virgin, meaning that she was chosen and sanctified as a toddler, and then sent to live with other women and girls, who would then become priestesses, royal wives, or, as was her case, sacrifices. She had been drugged with coca leaves and chicha, a maize beer, and had died in her sleep, a fate shared with the other children. DNA indicated that the 2 girls were half-sisters, but revealed no relation with the boy. The other girl, nicknamed La Niña del Rayo, or Lightning Girl, had been sacrificed when she was around 6 years old. Part of her shoulder and face were burned, damaged by lightning that struck her after her death. The boy was the only one who was found tied up tightly, which presumably dislocated his pelvis and some of his ribs. Blood and vomit were found on his clothes, indicating that he might have died under stress. The Museum of High Altitude Archaeology in Argentina is where the mummies may be found on display.
He is one of the few remaining members of the Medellin cartel, surrendered himself to the justice system, and he was released in August of 2014. We're gonna have him take us around to the different spots around Medellin.